What's up everyone, we're back at it again. My name is Brad and welcome back to my channel. Today what I want to do is I want to talk about what happens when you place your plants outside without properly acclimating it, but also at the same time talk about what some of those benefits are about putting your plants outside, especially if you find that they're struggling. So let's get to it. There are 3 plants that I've used to show what happens when you put your plant outside without properly acclimating it, but at the same time, why it's important to give your plant that bright direct sun, especially if it's struggling. So I have a Monstera Peru. I have a Satin Scadapsus. And then finally a Global Green Pothos. So for all 3 of these plants were really struggling. There really wasn't any growth that was being produced, despite the fact that I was giving the plants plenty of fertilizer. The plants also had a nice, strong, healthy root system, which in my mind, and as well as when you read literature, it suggests that you should also be able to support that topward up growth. And by topward growth, we're talking about any kind of growth that is above the soil level. So let's start off with the Monstera Peru. So with the Monstera Peru, I currently have 3 leaves, I have a branch on the vine, and I have 2 leaves that are trying to form. So let's get a close-up of this particular plant here. Now, with this, there are some things that you should be mindful of. When I put this Monstera Peru outside, I didn't acclimate it. And by acclimating, I mean I didn't give it time to slowly adjust to that bright, direct sunlight that was being given to it. Instead, I just threw it outside and I just thought, hey, let's see what happens. You can see the consequences of not properly acclimating it by looking at the leaves. The old leaves, have gotten this scorched look to them. So this isn't pests, this is just simply sunburn. Without properly acclimating, this is something that I fully expected to happen. I expected to have this leaf burn and this leaf scorch. Now, if I didn't want to have any kind of leaf burn or any kind of scorch on my Monstera Peru, what I would have instead done is I would have slowly adjusted it to what that outside sun felt like. So for the first week, for instance, I would put it outside for 30 minutes a day, bring it back in, next day, 30 minutes, bring it back in. And then week 2, I would up that to about an hour. So an hour outside, bring it in, an hour outside, bring it in. And then for week 2, I would do 2 hours. Week 3, 4 hours. And by week 4, I would do full sun outside all day. Keep it outside day and night, everything would be great. I didn't do this with this, and that's okay, because of the fact that these leaves are eventually going to go anyway. They're low enough on the vine to where I really wasn't concerned about the long-term aesthetics of what my Monstera Peru would look like with this leaf burn. Now, let's talk about the benefits of placing this outside. When I placed it outside, again, I really wasn't getting any kind of growth at all. I had 2 leaves, that was it. It had been long enough, and I should have had some kind of swelling or some kind of growth that was evident in the Monstera Peru, but I wasn't having it. Now, let's take a look at what the Monstera Peru looks like. If you like videos like this and want to see more videos about houseplant tips and tricks, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. It's totally free and would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to talking about what happens when you place your plant outside in that bright, direct sunlight. With the Monstera Peru, again, I have this leaf that's burned. I have the second leaf that's burned. But I also have this beautiful leaf that has no burning at all. In fact, it's quite perfect. And then I also have another leaf that is forming from the main stem of the Monstera Peru right above my thumb. And then, as you can see, I have this branch that occurred as well that also is going to be pushing out some new growth. Additionally, when you look at the Monstera Peru, it has actually started to attach itself to the mulch pole. Let's see if I can get a good angle. So we see this aerial root that is eventually going to come out and attach to this mulch pole here, which is great. So by placing this plant outside, what I've actually done is I've given this plant so much light that it has all of this energy and it has nothing left to do but to forcibly push out that new growth. You can also tell that it really enjoys being outside, or it really enjoys all of this sunlight, because of the fact that based on where the swelling is occurring and based on where this leaf is popping up, the internodal length, so the distance between the nodes, is getting smaller. So the smaller your internodal length suggests the more light that your plant is getting. I also want to bring this up because we have to remember that when we're taking care of these plants are native to environments where they aren't necessarily going to be shaded, especially when you take something like a monstera. The monstera is climbing because it actually wants to get more light, and it fenestrates because it actually wants to get more light. It wants to allow that light to penetrate through those fenestrations lower down into the vein or to the vine to allow it to feed itself as best as possible. So if it truly didn't want to have that bright light, it wouldn't want to climb. So keep that in mind when you're taking care of these plants and when trying to figure out what kind of lighting you want to give them. It is okay to give them that bright light, especially if you go ahead and acclimate it. It's also okay to give it that medium light, but just don't expect for that tremendous vigorous growth, and also don't expect for that internodal length to be small. It might be a little larger, but that's okay. If you have medium light and that's what works in your space, give your plant medium light. Don't feel obligated to give your plant something that you can't necessarily give it. So if you don't have money, for instance, for a grow light, don't feel obligated to buy a grow light. Instead, just know that your plant will be okay in that medium light situation and will also be okay in that bright, direct sunlight situation. Now let's talk about my global green pothos. The global green pothos, in my opinion, does have a very interesting variegated pattern to it, and this started off as a cutting. Again, it was similar to my Monstera Peru in that it really wasn't putting on any kind of growth. It was barely rooted. I knew it was rooted enough. I placed it in soil and I wanted to see what would happen. When I had it indoors, it really wasn't putting on any kind of growth, despite the fact that I was giving it between medium and bright indirect light. So I decided to place it outside and I wanted to see what would happen. Now, I will also do a close-up on this global green pothos so you can see the leaves, but for these leaves, you will notice that the variegation is starting to become strong. And again, because I didn't properly acclimate it, the older leaves basically burned and disintegrated, but that's okay. That is what I expected. But you need to be mindful that when you do something like that, so if you place your plant outside without acclimating it and you notice that your leaves are getting this very funny looking color to it, it isn't necessarily because of a pest. It could be because, or it could be something as simple as not acclimating your plant or your tree. So let's take a closer look at this global green pothos. So here's the global green pothos, a closer look. Here's the older leaf that I was talking about that wasn't acclimated and it just basically burned and disintegrated. I wanted to bring up the fact that if you aren't acclimating your plant and you notice this type of behavior in the leaves, don't panic and think that it is pest, because this leaf does show characteristics of what pest damage could look like if this plant was indoors, but it's not. Now, when going to the new healthy growth, both of these leaves have produced since being placed outside. So the plant has been outside for about 2.5 weeks. So that's quite the amazing growth. I'm going to go ahead and give this a mulch pole sometime this week, but just take a look at the beautiful colors that this global green pothos produces. It kind of reminds me of the Ficus altissima yellow gem, where the leaves have this lime green color that has this darker green color on the outside. The leaf shape or the leaf size is on the smaller side, but I do think that as this plant matures, it will get larger leaves. So here is the global green pothos, something that, if you want to add to your collection, I say go for it. Now, the thing too that you have to remember when it comes to variegated plants in general is that the more light that you give it, the more pronounced that variegation will tend to be. So if you have the medium light, absolutely, by all means, give your global green pothos that medium light, but don't expect to have the vivid variegation that you would get if it were placed in that direct, bright sunlight. But you might get some. So let's go and talk about the final plant, the satin scadapsus or the satin pothos. So here's the last plant that I want to talk about. It's commonly called the satin pothos, but it's actually a scadapsus. Now, this plant was quite the mystery to me in that I've had it for such a long time, but it just didn't want to produce any kind of growth. So I thought the best way to really encourage it to get better growth was to place it outside. And as I talked about with the Monstera Peru, really giving it and exposing it to that bright, direct sunlight gives your plant no other choice but to produce more leaves, because your plant wants to capture all of that sunlight that is coming from the sun and the skies and all of that good stuff. So I'm going to give you a closer look on this satin pothos and really talk about some of the characteristics and what it's done since being placed outside. So let's go take a look at it. So here is what the satin pothos or satin scadapsus looks like. As you can see, here's the older leaf that was placed outside when it didn't get properly acclimated. So this is absolutely what I expected to see. Now, if you turn it around, you'll see that it has produced this one little leaf and that there is another leaf that is starting to form as well. So we talked about this internodal length. And as you can see, this internodal length is quite large. So if you look at this node here and this node right above my finger, that distance is quite large, which is a sign that it wasn't getting enough sunlight, or it was getting sunlight, but the scadapsus didn't think that it was enough sunlight for itself. So by placing it outside, what has happened is this new leaf that is forming is really butted up against the node of the current leaf. So I expect for that internodal length actually to shrink. Now, it's quite remarkable because a couple of days ago, I noticed some swelling along the main vine, and when looking at it today, we see that that swelling has actually started to emerge and pop up a new leaf. So this is great. And again, it really is just a testament to what will happen or what can happen if you decide to place your plants outside. So again, if you need to place your plants outside to try and give it an extra boost, you absolutely should. I should also tell you that for this silver satin scadapsus, as well as the not silver satin, for the satin scadapsus as well as the global green pothos, I haven't fed them. So if I do feed them, I imagine that growth will be even more vigorous. I wanted to be careful before feeding these because I knew that the root system might be a little fragile, even though extensive, might be fragile because of the fact that it wasn't putting on enough top growth. Now that these plants have been outside and now that I see new growth being pushed out, I know that it will be okay to fertilize these plants without worrying about damaging the root system. My hope is that by showing you 3 plants that I've decided to place outside in bright direct sunlight without properly acclimating it will give you the courage and really the encouragement to place your plant outside as well, especially if it is struggling or if you needed to give it a boost. Now, keep in mind that if you do want to preserve those older leaves that maybe were formed when it was inside, be sure that you properly acclimate your plant by slowly getting it used to it being outside. If you don't really care about what those lower leaves look like and you're okay with the scorch and the burn of what that aesthetic will look like on your leaves, just go ahead and place your plant outside. It's totally fine. All in all, placing your plant outside will give it that boost that it needs because of all of that bright sunlight that your plant is now getting. I hope you liked this video, and if you found it helpful, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. I'll see you next time when I talk about other houseplant tips and tricks. Thank you again for watching.
What?